increasingly clear on over these weeks that schools clearly have to provide special ed services remotely to kids based on the IEP, based on the grid, based on the IEP goals. And we know there's been a lot of confusion at the beginning as I'm talking about what schools should be doing. A lot of you are going to be saying that that's not happening in my district. We know that districts have not been rolling this out evenly. And so that's part of why we wanted to really focus on what the law and the policy says schools should be doing so that we can get your questions about what problems and hiccups you might be experiencing. We know that districts have been increasingly getting more and more guidance specifically about what they need to do, which is part of why, you know, it's obviously been slow to ramp up. Nobody's ever experienced a pandemic before, but the capacity of school districts is increasing, and clearly the needs of kids to get services is vitally important, and it's been increasing as well. It's been hard for kids, foremost. It's been very difficult for parents, and it's been extremely taxing for educators as well. So next slide, please. Some of this is review, and some of this is going to be new information for those of you who participated in other chats, but we do know more information about what this looks like as these weeks have gone on. It's very clear that school districts have to provide the range of services, whether it's whole class instruction or small group instruction or one-to-one services or direct consultation for you as a family member, as including as well as related services are in the IEP. It's still the case that we know the school district may well not be able to implement all of the services that are in the IEP, but what the state has said very clearly is that districts cannot have blanket policies. It is not legal to say we don't provide speech therapy, we don't provide one-to-one ABA services, we aren't going to provide the one-to-one instruction. They have to provide what they can provide safely through distance learning, but they still need to address your child's unique and priority needs. So it's still a balance. We know obviously not everything can be provided in the same way with schools closed, but the guidance has become increasingly clear that districts have to do what they're capable of doing, consistent with your kids' needs. And in addition to those services, they do need to provide, you know, the assignments, the projects, the packets, the strategies, but also the accommodations that your child needs so that they can really access the learning opportunities that are being provided. And we know the accommodations are going to be really important, whether it's accommodations for kids who are deaf and hard of hearing or have visual impairments, or accommodations for kids who don't intuitively and naturally know how to access instruction that's remote, and needing direct services in order to be able to access what's being offered. Next slide, please. So one thing that the state has emphasized and the federal government has emphasized that has become increasingly clear, it is absolutely essential and critical that the district provide ongoing communication with you as family members to the extent that it's necessary to meet your child's unique needs. The communication is supposed to be regular. It's going to depend on your child's needs and your capacity. It may be different at different times when your child might be having escalated anxiety or behaviors or has been particular struggles accessing a particular math or reading instruction. You may need to request some more frequent communication and support than at other times, but it's really, I think, increasingly clear when we look at the number of kids who are not engaging effectively in the remote instruction that this kind of communication becomes really key to understand the barriers, to provide support, not just for the parent, but for then your IEP, your child's IEP team to help you brainstorm how to really make these services more appropriate and more accessible for your kids. A couple weeks ago, Dr. McDade spoke, for those of you who were here the night that she spoke, and she really gave a lot of really good suggestions for children with more significant disabilities, with intellectual disabilities and autism, about how to provide the accommodations, how to provide the communication, and how to really teach. For a lot of kids, when schools are open, they may not intuitively learn and access things in the same way non-disabled kids do. You know, kids with autism may need to be taught social skills and communication skills that they don't learn intuitively, or kids with ID may need some direct instruction to access different parts of the curriculum. And so some kids are going to need direct instruction to really learn how to effectively engage in the kind of thing we're doing right now. And again, the connection and hearing from you about what's working and not working is kind of the theme that's been there from March 17th when this all began to May 28th. Is that where we are, really? Shockingly. Next slide, please. The state more recently in the last weeks has made it very clear that every child who has an IEP should by now have received a written remote learning plan. The remote learning plan is going to lay out the special ed services that are based on your child's IEP, based on their service delivery grid, based on their goals and objectives that the district's going to be providing. The state has provided a remote learning plan template and form that districts can choose to use. We've given you a link to that at the end. They don't have to use that particular form, but they do have to provide the information that is behind this poll. And again, we know that at first, when the state required these remote learning plans, it was going to take districts time to get them up and running. But at this point, the expectation is that every child should have a remote learning plan. The other thing the state made really clear is that we know that over time, the district's knowledge and capacity of how to provide remote services effectively is going to continue to grow and increase. And so it's assumed that the services will become more robust over time as well. So the state has said that the date that services are started should be included in this written document. And then as services are increased or modified, then there should be a new date included as well. So the remote learning plan, and I'm really eager I didn't have a chance to look at the poll. Lily, what did the poll say? How many people have remote learning plans now? What percentage?
We've got 82% saying yes to their child receiving a remote learning plan. And does it meet your child's most pressing needs? 15% for yes, 38% for no, and 49% for partially. And yeah, keep those coming in. There's still a few people voting.
So it's great that people have, such a large number of people do have plans for your kids. Hopefully the plan has all the information that is so important for you as family members to be able to support your child. There should be the daily schedule that lays out whatever kinds of services based on your child's IP the district is saying they're going to provide at this time. You know, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, when is full group instruction, when is small group instruction, when is you know, any related services going to be provided. It just specified the specific educators are going to be involved, as well as how they're going to be communicating with you and what the schedule for that communication we talked about is, so that they should work out a schedule that works for you as well. A lot of parents are working so that you can actually have the regular communication you need. And so this remote learning plan is hopefully going to first make it more doable for you to support your kids in participating, and also to address the district any problems you have, but the very many of you have pointed out the plan in your view isn't meeting all of your kids' needs. So what many parents are asking us in the next slide is what to do if my, first of all, if my child doesn't have a remote learning plan. And for those in the, whatever the percent was, 15% who don't, our suggestion is to first, you know, contact your team leader or your principal. We have a sample email you can use to request the remote learning plan that you should have had already. You know what the urgency is for your child. If your child's in a where time is of the essence, you may not have time to go through all these steps. But in our experience, going directly to the team leader and principal often has resolved at least getting the first remote learning plan in the hands of the family. But it's the same as when there isn't COVID. You can then go to the special ed director or the superintendent. You can file a complaint with the State Department of Ed. They are definitely taking complaints right now and acting on them. And we've heard some very positive things from parents and advocates who have filed complaints when they need to. We've also gotten some very good results from taking the steps before going to the state. So you know best what the time urgency is with your child, but we're really hoping that most things will be resolved before having to file a complaint. And absolutely call our helpline if you're having difficulty. We also know that for some families, having access to devices or the internet or needing tech support in order to access remote learning can also be a barrier. And those are things that can also be addressed by contacting your school leaders or filing a complaint if you can't resolve it that way in the state. We have heard that the state has helped to resolve some of those basic access issues to the technology that's needed. Thanks, Joanne, for moving the slide. So the bigger question that sounds like it's on the very big, vast majority of folks who are here tonight is, what do you do if your learning plan isn't adequate, or if it's, if the things on the paper aren't being implemented the way that they're said to be? So again, you know how critical, how urgent, how dangerous, how much time you have to try to resolve these issues. But what we have heard time and time and again in our experience is that it's obviously remote instruction. It's harder for teachers to know all of what's working and not working. Obviously, if a child's never showing up, if they're never showing up for the Zoom instruction, or if they can see that the child won't attend, then they do have some knowledge. But what's going to be most important is for you to document in an email what your main concerns are, why what's in the remote learning plan isn't adequate, and the extent that you have a sense of it, what you think your child needs, so that they have a chance of really learning some of what's being offered. We know that kids with many types of disabilities aren't going to be able to benefit what's being offered without some very specialized services and accommodations. Again, then you can go to the superintendent and the special ed director. You can contact the MACS helpline, and these are also issues where you can file a complaint or request mediation. But we have found that many issues are being resolved with the creative problem solving that's going to be required for you and your team members to figure out how to do this as effectively as possible when this has never been done before. But at some point you reach an impasse, and the clock is always ticking on your child's needs, so you'll have the sense of when you may need to go further in terms of complaints. Lilia, should I keep going, or are there questions at this point?
Yeah, I was just going to say we have a lot of questions coming in. I think this is a good place for a break. I also want to say the links here on the slides, we'll be emailing the presentation slides and a recording to everyone. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. Our first question is, our OT has not been providing virtual lessons during the school closure. She has only recently offered to do OT through Zoom, but it's close to the end of the school year. Do we have any recourse?
If I understand, this sounds like I may not be understanding the question accurately, but the OT services were not provided for the first several months, and now the question is, now if they are being provided, is there any recourse for the services that weren't being provided? And if that's it's so hard, I can't look at you to see if your head is nodding yes or no. Maybe the person could email.
Oh, yes. Sorry, you can't see me either. Yes, it sounds to me like that's what they mean.
So yes, there is, and the federal government and state government have made it very clear that, and we're going to talk about this later, that they realize that there are going to be many families who may require additional services or compensatory services for your child. So our bottom line that we'll talk about later is, it's great that you're doing as much as you can now to work with the school district to get as many services now as you can, because one thing we know as we're going to talk about schools reopening potentially, is it's very possible that even when schools do reopen, it's going to be a combination of continued remote learning and sometime in the schools. Nobody knows for sure. So it's great that you've done everything that you can to get the services now, and it is going to be a kid-by-kid determination of what additional or compensatory services are needed for your child. So to keep a record, keep documentation of what your child is getting and how they're doing is going to be really important for the future. And it's also really important now, because if you're documenting the way your child might be struggling without the services you know that are so necessary, and you provide that information to the team, that may help them to prioritize figuring out a way to get the services now. Because we can give compensatory services to kids for the services lost, and we know that all kids have lost a lot of learning opportunities over these many months, but it's never the same thing as getting, you're always trying to make up for the harm that happened from the kids losing the opportunity to learn, and in many cases regressing. So it's great that you're doing all you can to get it now. Sorry, that was too long of an answer.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, to begin to make the case and demonstrate that my son's educational needs are not being met, what data and information would be best for me to provide?
That's a great question, and I'm sure other people in the chat will have ideas for you as well. I would suggest, if you've got your IEP at home, which hopefully you do, just review your child's goals and objectives. You also know from yourself what you can see and what your child is not doing, what your child is learning and what your child is not able to learn, and how they might be losing skills. So the Federation for Children with Special Needs has a document we can make available tomorrow about how to document what services are being provided and how your child is doing. We are also working with Families Organizing for Change on a phone app that, like any tech thing, we keep thinking it's ready to distribute, and now we're hoping for next week, but which will be another way that you can keep track. But I'd say most important is to document what you know your child's priority areas of need are, and to also provide information to your team in real time, to give them the chance to problem solve with you, but also to have that in case you need to address the need for compensatory services. I hope that addresses the question.
Thank
but
you.
Base it on the IEP.
Okay.
Part.
Our next question is, and we have a lot coming in, we'll do some more question breaks throughout, but our next question is, my son has a one-on-one aide in school, in a collaborative school. Our district pays for the aide. She works with him for an hour every morning, then joins a couple of group sessions with the rest of the class, but I'm still doing a lot of the teaching. Should this be the case since she's in the IEP and the district is paying for her, meaning the one-on-one aide?
I'm more of a visual than oral person, so I'm trying to get the question, but the services are based on your child's IEP. So it sounds like the time that the paraprofessional is working with your child to facilitate their learning is in the IEP. So yes, it's a reasonable thing if that's what your child is, part of what your child is missing now. And we've definitely had experience where a paraprofessional working with a child in a whole classroom remote instruction setting is really important. Or sometimes it's a paraprofessional who can really connect with the child in the way to help them feel less anxious so that they can feel more comfortable participating and attending. So it is it will probably not be possible for all of the services in your child's IEP to be fully implemented, but it's very reasonable for you to explain why they're so important and to advocate strongly for the things that you know are essential for your child to be able to progress and to learn.
Do you want to do one more question for this break?
Sure.
Okay. Our next question is, our district is still not providing telehealth speech services because of the SLP additional licensing requirement. This is despite the waiver because they say the professional development will be required after the fact. Are others seeing this, and do you have any advice?
that's really sad to hear, but we have heard, I don't know if people are saying in the chat, but we've heard that there are still problems with speech therapy. That is, in our view, the school department should be figuring out a way to provide the speech therapy, and the fact that ultimately that speech therapists are going to have to take 10 hours of professional development around telehealth at some point does not seem at this point a reasonable, even with the pandemic, a reasonable reason not to provide services that are in your child's IEP. So again, with something like that, what we've already said in terms of the different steps you could take, it's the kind of thing where you could advocate, you could call our helpline or some other advocacy group, you could ultimately file a complaint. There may be some particular details in that district that we're not aware of, but you know, that's disappointing to hear. Are there comments saying that that's happening in a lot of districts still? We know that was a problem in the first couple months.
Okay. I'm not seeing anything in the chat box now. Oh, yes, happening in ours, somebody says. You know, there's some parents and some advocates here tonight, so.
Yes, so again, please contact our helpline if that's an issue and you feel like there might be a way that you could get some assistance with that.
Okay, still no speech services in Lexington. Yep,
A lot of places.
Melrose. Yeah. Sounds like it's.
Sounds like there may need to be some more advocacy at the state level around that too. But again, the more we hear from you, we can help, you know, do what we can to help you individually and also try to address what may be going on systemically.
Okay. All right. We've got some more questions, but you might be answering these in the remaining slides. Go for it.
Next slide, please, Joanne. So we've had lots of questions about IEP meetings. And again, we know that at the beginning, obviously the first couple of weeks, everybody was families, educators, administrators. It took time to regroup. The guidance has become more and more clear from the state. The federal government has made it clear that the procedures and the timelines are still in place for IEPs and evaluation. So it is very clear now that IEP meetings should be happening. You know, whether it's by video or by phone. The timelines are still in place. We're going to talk more about timelines in a minute. You as parents have to agree to the fact that you want to participate in a remote IEP meeting, which has already been in place in the federal law and regulations that districts can offer them, and it's a parent's choice whether or not parents want to have an IEP meeting or wait until schools reopen. I think it's really going to depend on the circumstances for your individual child. Some families have children where they're getting ready to make a transition from elementary to middle school, or they had a rejected IEP, or their child was really struggling before COVID, and they feel very important that they want to go ahead with the meeting even though it's remote. Others may feel like they would prefer to wait. So that's completely you know, up to the parents and the districts, and it's really important for the districts and the families to work collaboratively as possible to schedule the team meetings, because even though the timelines are in place, we know that it is more difficult to meet the timelines than usual. Next slide, please. So the district can approach you as a parent and say, we want to see if you'll agree to extend the timeline. And we always encourage parents to be as collaborative and cooperative as you can in terms of dealing with the realities of the pandemic. And at the same time, knowing what the urgency is and what the situation is, and for your child, you know, is your child in crisis? Is your child situation fine to delay it? You know that best. Just because you disagree, unfortunately, doesn't mean that the school district has to go ahead and provide the team meeting within the timeline. But if you do disagree, then you have a clear right to file a complaint, to go to mediation, or even to go to the SEA. And the state has said very clearly that if the district proposes to extend the timeline, they have to explain all that in writing and give you an actual date of when it's being postponed to. So that's really important to realize as well. think that's probably enough about that at this point. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but it will come up as we have questions. So evaluations and reevaluations, we've also gotten lots and lots of questions about this. And again, for some kids, getting an evaluation, which is got more challenges than IEP meeting to conduct remotely, is critically important. There are some families whose children were referred for their initial evaluation before COVID, and the testing didn't happen. So they are waiting months and months and months, right, without any special ed services and supports. There's other families for whom their child may have been really struggling, or like you said, they may have had to reject the IEP, and it's really important to get a new evaluation because of what's been going on for their child. So again, the feds have said that these requirements are still in place. The state has said that districts should conduct assessments remotely. And at the same time, the state recognizes that not all types of evaluations can be conducted remotely. So the law says one thing, and then the science of evaluations and testing is saying, well, not all tests can reliably and validly be provided, you know, with a computer and Zoom or whatever like we're doing. So the state has said that for now, the districts can use their professional judgment of their psychologist or speech therapist who's ever doing the evaluation about determining whether or not an assessment or parts of an assessment can be conducted remotely. But the decision has to be individualized, you know, based on the testing methodology and the child's particular circumstances and needs. So again, there is not legal to have any blanket prohibitions, according to the state, that where they say in all instances we're not going to be doing any evals or any re-evals. The state has also made it clear that this district, if they can't conduct evaluations, then they should consider other data that you may have from outside evaluations, from pediatricians, from other practitioners that relate to your child's disabilities or suspected disabilities. The other thing that's really important is, I think there's two other points that the states emphasize that we have heard time and time and again as we've been talking to practitioners in the field is, one, is there are parts of some kinds of evaluations that can be conducted. You know, maybe the block design of the WISC, the IQ test, is harder to do remotely, but there's inventories, there's observations, there's, you know, inventories for teachers, inventories for parents. There are, it seems to us anyway, that there are clearly some parts of assessments that should be able to go forward remotely, even if not all parts of all assessments can. And the other thing the state has made clear is it's over time, it's going to be more, because we're going to be dealing with this for a while, it appears, you know, most likely beyond the summer, at least in some ways, there may be less access to schools being open. So it's anticipated that what's can be done now for testing is going to be much more expanded in the future. So this is a big issue, right? I'm sure, I wish we could do a poll with every slide, but we're hearing about these huge backlogs because when schools do open, there's so many kids who are going to be needing their evals and re-evals. It could, just because schools open doesn't mean everybody's going to get their testing right away. So the next slide, the timeline issue is the same. Timelines are still in effect. You as a parent can choose to postpone the evaluation until, or the reevaluation if it's required. You know, you've got your 3-year reeval, and that you're going to know for your child, you might decide it's really better to wait until they can do an in-person reevaluation. Or you may feel that it's really important to advocate for at least the pieces of the evaluation that your child can access remotely because of the urgency of your child's situation. You can agree to extend the timelines if they can't conduct remote testing in their professional judgment. They need to give you a specific date, and the same things apply. If you disagree, you do have access to the state complaint, mediation, and hearing options. For initial evals, one last slide on that, and I don't know when you want to take another break, but let's just finish evaluations. For kids who are not yet, don't have IEPs and they haven't been determined to be eligible, the other thing the state has said, which is important to emphasize, is that a district can develop a partial IEP if some assessments or some aspects of assessments have been able to be conducted, or there's some outside information available, and the team agrees that the child does have a disability and does require special ed. They can then develop this partial IEP. That means services need to be provided immediately, and then when schools open, they can conduct the other aspects of the evaluation through what the state regs call an extended evaluation process, which is really meant for a different circumstance, but the state's applying it to the pandemic. So bottom line is, if there's enough information to know that a child needs an IEP, the district should be writing a partial IEP and starting the services while they wait till the schools open.
Okay. Do we want to do a question break?
Yeah, why don't you put up the next slide while we do the question break?
Our next question is, my children are having a hard time keeping on top of their schedules, and so are we. All three have organization support in their IEP, but we don't want to ask for too much. How do we know if we should ask for help?
It's a really good question. And I think it's great the way you're clearly being sensitive to the fact that you know that the teachers, the administrators are also dealing with all the stress of shelter in place, and that that this is hard for everybody. And at the same time, you clearly have a good awareness of what your child needs and how they're struggling because they aren't getting supports that they need. So it would seem to me, again, it's hard without knowing all the specifics of the facts, but the school districts have now had more time. I think they'd really appreciate, your first reaching out, and maybe you've already done this, to the team leader or to the principal, and talking about it from the equity perspective, that your child, because of their, I can't remember how you described it, executive functioning or organizational needs, isn't able to access the learning opportunities that are being offered without the supports that they're used to, and to problem solve with them about ways that they can do more, they can support you to do more. It's completely reasonable to ask for that, and we have found that a lot of schools try to meet in the middle as they address these issues. But it's, the law pre-COVID recognizes that you have such expertise about your kids, that you understand what they need, and now more than ever, the schools need your input to figure out where the gaps are and to problem solve it with you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Excellent advice. Our next question is, my son's IEP has expired. The school said verbally we would have an IEP meeting in May, and I haven't heard anything. Do you have advice?
Yes, first of all, even if your IEP is expired, the state has made it very clear. It doesn't mean that your child has no rights to services. If they're not able to hold the IEP meeting on the required date, then the previous IEP that expired is still in play. They're still legally obligated to be meeting your child's needs based on that IEP. So it's very clear, and the state has told all the special ed directors they should be contacting you at this point, and they should be trying to work out a date with you. That hasn't happened. I would think if it were me, as a first step, you could send an email saying that you are aware that they should be scheduling a date and that you want one. The problem is the school year is going to end soon, right? So if you want one before the summer vacation, then I would strongly encourage you to go through those steps and make it clear that it's already past due in April, and if you believe it's really important to have it for your child before the school year starts, then it's going to be important to push for that now. The state is also, we're going to talk about schools opening to the extent that we know something, which is not a lot. But one thing that the state has said is that to the extent that schools are open, if it works consistent with whatever the governor decides, that they're encouraging districts to try to deal with some of the backlog of testing and IEP meetings when schools are partially open, or over the summer, even if it's still remotely, but to try to deal with some of the backlog as much as they can. And I know teachers are burnt out. Administrators are burnt out, and they're also very worried about these backlogs, and they're worried about kids not getting what they need. So I do believe districts are going to do as much as they can over the summer.
We have a follow-up to that. What if the school isn't following the old IEP, 2 or 3 years old? There's a couple people chiming in with that, have that same issue.
If they're not following it in this time of COVID, then it's kind of what we're talking about in terms of what you do if the remote learning plan isn't adequate. You know, it's still fair game. Again, be cognizant of the limitations because of safety, but it's still expected that parents will speak up if they know that there's really important elements of the IEP that need to be addressed and need some creative problem solving about how to address them remotely. So the IEP, even if it's an older IEP, is whatever IEP is in effect is still, it's those goals and objectives and that service delivery grid that should be the basis of the remote learning plan. I wonder if we should go on to the rest, and then we can do, if people want to stay past, you know, until 9, we can do the rest of the questions.
Sure, we did have one question which can lead into it. You might be answering this. But one person asked, if Governor Baker or Chester open schools this summer, does the extended school year go back to the IEP, even remotely, or does it stay on the remote learning plan with no parent input needed?
Let's keep going. We're going to get to that. Maybe in
Okay.
the next slide. So as we've said before, but I just really want to emphasize this because we have heard this from many, many districts. The districts, some districts initially, hopefully they're rolling them back, have had blanket policies about the type of services or whether they do IEP meetings or evaluations, and the state has said that's not legal. You have to look at the individual needs of the child and safety at the same time, and you can't require parents to waive away any rights in order to get the things that they need, like a team meeting. So let's go to the next slide. This is some hot news off the press for, I wish we could do immediate polls. I don't know if there's any people here who have kids who have turned 3 or are turning 3, but if you have older kids and your kids are involved in the early intervention, you know that that's a really important juncture. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this now, but if you do have a kid in that age range and you're having issues, again, you can call our helpline. But the new news is that for kids, it's been a problem because when kids exit EI, since the schools are closed, it's been very difficult, if not impossible, to transition to school-based special ed services. So the kids have been just without anything, you know, even remote services. So starting sometime in June, we don't know the date, so don't immediately call your EI provider yet. We will notify everybody who's on our list as soon as we get the rollout date of this from early intervention. But for kids who turn 3 between March 15th and August 31st, they will be able to continue to receive their early intervention IFSP services through the middle of October, and then that gives the district time, as things begin to gradually reopen, to finish the assessment and IEP meeting process to determine eligibility. So that's really important to know that both things are in play. School districts still absolutely need to move forward, but there is a way that kids will be able to continue to receive some services. Next slide, please. Just to remind people, I think most folks know that, again, a lot of these things, what's in law and what happens in practice are two very different things, but districts have to be communicating in the parent's primary language. Interpreters and translators need to be provided if needed. And for a lot of families for whom English is not their primary language, there's an increased need for interpreters and translators because the family's so responsible for everything. So if families need things translated in order to understand instructions and homework, the law is clear and the policy is clear that those things should be provided. And the state is trying to roll out some services to help districts with language access issues. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk faster. So extended school year, which must be on a lot of people's minds. Again, this has been incredibly difficult for school districts as well because they keep asking the state, are we going to be open or are we not going to be open? And it is expected, you know, as with everything, I believe it when it happens, that the state is going to announce their plans next week about whether schools are going to be open or not. Regardless of what the state decides, we know that health and safety is going to remain a really top priority. And as the state has said, if the schools do open, it's really very likely that it's going to include some remote services and maybe at the beginning some very limited in-person services, because the school districts need time to get the PPE, to deal with the cleanliness, to deal with all the issues that are a very robust number to make sure that it's safe. And there's not a lot of time till extended school year services will begin. So we don't have a clear answer. We do know that it's very likely that if schools open at all, it may be gradual even over the weeks of the summer in terms of how many kids and on what basis they're going to be re-entering. So again, we will get the information out as soon as we're aware of it in the state. So if we have folks emails, Leah, we can include all that in our blast. All these folks will be included as we get updates on these things.
Yep. Absolutely.
And it's, again, what we're hearing from families is it's because you're thinking about the summer and you're also thinking about the fall. So maybe we can go to the next slide and then we'll really be able to open it up to more questions. The state is working to announce their guidance for fall reopening by mid-June. And they have a task force that's got administrators and parents and teachers that are trying to develop all the protocols and procedures to address safety and effective learning for kids on just all the range of issues that I'm sure all of you have been thinking about. And I think, again, everybody is very anxious to see what their plans are going to be. We know that it's very possible that even as schools reopen in the fall, it may be necessary in order to have smaller class sizes and social distancing and transportation. It's very possible that they're not going to be opening full time. There might be staggered schedules, there might be alternating weeks. We know all sorts of things are being considered. So as we wait to find out what the state recommends in terms of safety, what we're recommending to parents is to start, and I'm sure you're thinking about things, is to identify the concerns you have for your child, given their disability-related needs and their health needs of what they need to ensure a smooth transition. So that when the district does announce its plans, it's also going to have to be consistent with your city or town's health department, how they open up. You can help identify, if a lot of people talked about masks, for kids with autism and other disabilities, there's sensory issues and other issues about wearing a mask or seeing people with masks can cause anxiety for some kids. There's a lot of questions about how to have safe transportation. For a lot of kids, if schools are restructured the way people are thinking they might be, it's going to be such a drastic change for kids to go into a school building that looks and feels so different. You'll know how to make that a smooth transition. Does your child need to have some visits before it's opened? Or, you're going to know best how to make it as smooth a transition as possible for dealing with whatever may be different when the fall does come. So we will definitely be doing more of these chats and we know more of the specifics, but we do know that whatever your district's policy is, your input about how to make it work for your child is going to be really important. And then the last slide, I think it's the last slide, is the compensatory services, which we really already talked about. We know, and the districts know, and they're a little freaked out about not just what's happening. They're very worried about what's going on with all their students, disabled and non-disabled, who can't get the education services that everybody's dedicated their profession to providing. They're also really worried about how they're going to make up for the lost time for kids with disabilities. They know they're going to have an individualized process for determining that. The state has promised to give more guidance. We promised to give you how the state is suggesting districts make this case-by-case determination. But most important is get as many services as you can now and document, as one of the questions was, what is your child getting and how is your child doing? So I think I just did the last slide too, and let's open it up. It is a quarter of, right?
Yep.
So for folks who need to leave, thank you so much. We'll stay on till 9, but if anybody needs to leave, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you being here. We will continue to have speakers and also have a chance to talk about the law. We could also in the future have something that's only Q&A if people think that would be useful. And we are going to have a poll just for you to give us feedback about how well this forum works that we're going to do as we end this part of it and open the last 15 minutes up for anybody who wants to do more questions. But we cannot thank you enough for all you're doing for the kids in your own family. We know that a lot of you are also doing things to support other kids as well in your communities. And this is such a tough time for everybody, for educators, for parents, and most importantly for the kids. So we appreciate your willingness to spend yet a Thursday night here trying to figure out how to do as much as we can for kids during this unbelievable emergency situation that seems to keep going. So Lily, should we just do more questions for those who want to stick around?
Yeah, let's jump into it. Thank you, Julia. We have a lot of people with this question. Will school time and or compensatory services be extended past the age of 22? Or can you request that?
You can definitely request it. There is pre-COVID case law where children have been awarded compensatory services when the school district didn't provide what was legally obligated when they were younger than 22. There's been awards of services that have had to be provided when the child is over 22. So it is legally possible. It doesn't mean that every child who's turning 22 is going to be entitled to compensatory services. There's also a lot of advocacy going on at the state level. There are some kids like in those situations where we're hoping that the state guidance will make it easier so that it doesn't have to be a family by family intense process to figure out what's fair, because it is going to be more difficult to make a child whole when they're exiting. So for those of you who come to a lot of these chats, it's frustrating when we keep saying we don't know. But the reason we can't say definitively anything is because these are all new legal issues. We've never had a pandemic, and these are all new state-of-the-art issues in terms of how and what can school districts provide remotely. But it is really clear that a lot of kids, including those turning 22, are going to need some additional services, and I believe there's going to be a lot of advocacy to try to make sure that happens. But again, if you're concerned about it for your own child, you can definitely call our helpline, and we will be hopefully giving you more guidance about that in the future.
Okay. Next question. If schools aren't providing telehealth or one-on-one virtual services, what are the next steps to try and get these therapies?
If they are, I guess there could be two situations. If a school district isn't providing it for anybody as a matter of policy, then that would be one type of advocacy or process that you might want to go through in order to get those services for your own child. If they are providing them, but they're not able to provide them for your child specifically, then it's a different type of advocacy. But either way, again, we know that most kids are not going to get all the services that are on their IEP grid. But if a district is got a policy or practice where they're not providing a certain type of services for all kids, regardless of your kid's unique needs, to us as lawyers and advocates, that seems to be very inconsistent with the requirements of the law and of the policy from the state. So the choices of what to do in terms of contacting your principal and team leader, contacting the superintendent, special ed director, filing a complaint, those are all viable options. It would be easier with the more details to know, help you think through what might be right at this time for your family.
A few people had this question. My son's doctor said he can't go to school in the fall for health reasons. What would my IEP look like, and how do I advocate for services?
Again, I didn't see the poll to know how many people said they would not feel comfortable or for health reasons not be able to send their child back in if they do reopen. So I assume that it depends on your child's needs and what the doctor says, right? Is the doctor saying that it's not safe to have people come into the house or not? That's one question, because if the governor has, and the health department has said it is at the point where service providers can go into people's homes, then it may be possible that the child could get some home instruction. But again, if because of your child's disability or medical needs, they can't have either, then you're going to be looking, I assume, at more robust remote instruction and services. So again, it depends on the specific needs. We are hoping that that there will be a combination of the services. We know that for a lot of kids with more significant disabilities, it is really important as soon as it's safe to start getting some in-person instruction, but it has to be safe for the kids and for the educators.
Okay. So will virtual learning be allowed for children with medical issues if school is back in a physical building?
I guess the question is saying if schools are reopening and parents believe that it's not safe, is that going to be allowed? These are all questions that the State Department of Ed is trying to figure out how to give guidance about. I think that as we've talked to policymakers, they're very aware that safety has to be number one for the educators, and it has to be number one for kids and families. So it would be hard to imagine that there's not going to be some process set up to make sure that it is safe, which means, and also, I could be wrong. I was a betting woman. I would say, and I could be completely wrong, that whatever opens up in the fall is going to be probably for all kids a combination of some continued remote instruction and some in-person, which means that it's very likely that there would continue to be these remote options available. But I could be completely wrong. I've been wrong many times before.
On the other side of things, I'm going to combine these two questions. We have a few goal areas that just don't work out remotely. Vocational and transition type goals or social communication goals. Do you have any guidance as to how these types of things can be implemented? And what do you recommend for kids who telehealth virtual services just don't work? Do I document it for later? What do I do? I've seen my daughter decline tremendously since school has been out.
There's nothing harder, right, as a parent than to watch your child struggle or decline and not be able to get them the services that they need. I mean, it's like the definition of hell, right? And so I wish I had an easy answer. You're right to absolutely keep documenting it. We had somebody come in and talk about transition services remotely, and so we can send you that link, or I think that's on our website. I think there are some creative ways. Again, it's not going to be the same as actually going out in the community and being on a job site and learning transportation skills or being on a college campus, but there are some creative ways to provide some of those services. The experts we've been talking to have also been saying it's hard, but there are creative ways to address social skill instruction. I mean, it really depends on, so much depends on the child and trying to develop new systems. But we've heard of, and some districts are only offering pre-recorded sessions, and so we've heard from families that it's harder to focus on social skills if it's not live, social skills group or small group sessions. So it is hard. We could also give you some names of some of the experts who've been thinking about this to problem solve it with you, so you to help you problem solve it with the team. But there's not an easy answer, but I really do believe if this continues to go on, at least in some fashion, for the many months to come, that schools partnering with parents, it's not going to happen without partnering with parents, are going to figure out how to better engage kids. But it's not going to be the same as when schools are open.
Okay. Our next question, do you know anything about reopening residential facilities?
I don't that's all part of what is going to be released in June, hopefully. They have somebody from the Mass Association of Approved Private Schools that's on the state working group. And so they are thinking about how do we open day schools, how, they're already beginning to look at how to allow visits to residential schools and other congregate care settings. So a lot is slowly rolling out, but nothing can roll out until there's another call from the state, about what and how to do things safely. And then you also have to look at the, public health rules of your community.
Okay.
Some people have said it could be different in different communities, right? And depending on where the COVID rates are. I mean, I don't know. I just know all the things that I hear policymakers talking about.
Okay. Next question. I thought only case coordinators can stay on as a liaison to help parents advocate, but no direct IFSP services like speech
That
language
was the
or
case
OT.
until this hot news. There's been
Okay.
a lot of advocacy with, that's a good question. That was the case for early intervention. And it was just announced this week. There's been a lot of advocacy groups who have been advocating for some solution for these 3-year-olds who are really stuck without anything. So it's not rolled out yet. We will let you know, if people call their early intervention provider tomorrow, they won't be able to get services. It will be rolling out hopefully sometime in early June. And as soon as it rolls out, we will announce it to people.
Okay. And we'll send information in the email with the
But it's
recording.
a very
and everything too.
exciting change. And I do have to give the state, things are always painfully slow, right? When kids are without services for a lengthy period of time, but the insurance, every secretariat and state agency pulled together in a matter of weeks to make this happen. And so we really do need to give a lot of kudos to the state for trying to address this issue for 3-year-olds.
Okay. I'm going to sneak in one last question. Some of my clients are having outside testing done. Some insurances will cover some of the testing. Will insurance cover the cost if it's done virtually? And will schools support outside testing if it's done virtually?
All good questions to which it's really going to probably be, I don't know in terms of the insurance coverage issues. It's probably going to be different from policy to policy in the same way insurance companies shifted around telehealth. I don't know. I actually don't know. It's a really good question to what extent the insurance companies are shifting, but I would guess it's different company to company. And that's one of the worries of parents who are pursuing outside evaluations, because some outside evaluators are now opening up ways to provide safe in-person evaluations, and some are doing remote evaluations. If they're remote, then we don't know yet to what extent the state is going to, school districts will question the reliability and validity. I think a lot of those issues are going to be, have to be addressed on a kid-by-kid basis in terms of how reliable and valid they are, depending on what type of tests they are. So again, we could give you some more information based on what we've been learning about remote assessments based on your child's particular needs, but you've framed all the questions that everybody's struggling with really a lot right now.
All right, that's a wrap. We're at 9 o'clock.
Great. Well, thanks for so many of you for staying extra long, and again, for all your great advocacy and support for your kids and the kids you work with. We will continuing on. I hope people enjoyed a longer weekend last weekend, if you can remember that far, and if you know what days of the week they are. Thanks so much. Have a good weekend coming up.
Thank you, everyone.
And you did the survey at the end?
Yeah.
Great.
Did Lilia leave?
Did what?
Did Lilia leave? Hey, Ann. Ann popped in. I'll unmute her. Wait a minute. There's others here, though.
That was great, Joanne and Julia and Lilia. Thank you.
Thank you. It's fun to see you there.
Yeah, good seeing you.
Got my hair cut. It's a good day.
I was gonna make a joke about how long my hair is getting, how grayer and longer my hair is getting.
Yeah, I think hair looks good, so just own it. I think it looks good.
There's no choice. There's no choices.
Right. That was great, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
So I guess we should just exit. Did Lilia leave us?
I guess she did. I hope she stopped the recording and saved it. That was kind of weird. She doesn't usually do that.
Should we text her
I can text her, yeah. What do you want me to ask her?
to make sure she stopped it or whatever? I don't know. I don't understand technology. All right, I guess we should just exit, right?
Yeah, I'll save the, well, I don't know if I can. I'll try.
Or should we not until we talk to Lilia?
No, you can go. Cause you can go if you need to, because I'm on here too as Mac, so.
Okay, so we won't lose it.
No.
All right,
Well, all right, Julia, I'll talk to you later. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
thank you.
Bye.